My parents paid every cent for my sister's college, her tuition, her apartment, even her spring break trips. When I asked for help, they said I wasn't the academic type. For years later, at her graduation ceremony, the dean stepped up to the microphone, paused, and then screamed my name instead. And that's when my parents realized they had backed the wrong daughter. Ever since I can remember, Erilyn seemed to have everything handed to her. She got the best tutors, the newest laptops, trips to explore colleges, and classes that I could only dream of. While she had a schedule full of enrichment programs and extracurriculars, I was working after school at a small cafe, trying to earn money to buy my own textbooks. Every time I mentioned wanting extra help with math or science, my parents would shrug and tell me I just needed to try harder on my own. I spent countless afternoons in the library, doing the same assignments she had a tutor for, trying to keep up. I watched Erilyn rehearse for competitions, attend workshops, and get praised for every little achievement, while I was told to stay practical and focus on local schools. I learned to smile and nod when my parents discussed her future plans in front of me, pretending I wasn't quietly seething. It wasn't just about money. It was the attention, the constant reminders that Erilyn was the one they believed in. Birthdays, holidays, even simple school events revolved around her. I remember receiving secondhand encouragement like, "You're doing fine for now," while she was celebrated with certificates and new gadgets. Even at 15, I understood the pattern. I stopped asking for extra help and stopped hoping for recognition. I became careful not to take space or make demands. I learned to keep my accomplishments small and quiet, to fit the role my parents had assigned me. Invisible, practical, the backup child. I knew then that if I wanted more, I'd have to do it entirely on my own. And so, quietly, I started building my own path, one step at a time, while Erilyn continued to live in the spotlight that was never meant for me. The day the college acceptance letters came was one I'll never forget. Erilyn ran to our living room, screaming with excitement when she saw hers. Havenport University, one of the top schools she had been dreaming about, had accepted her. My parents hugged her tightly, tears streaming down their faces. They called relatives and friends to share the news, their voices full of pride and relief, as if all their hopes had been answered in that single moment. When I opened my own letter, my heart sank for a moment, even though I had been accepted to the same school with a partial merit scholarship. I thought maybe this time they would finally see me, finally help me like they did Erilyn. I showed them the letter, trying to mask my excitement with a calm smile, hoping for at least a word of encouragement. Instead, my father shook his head slowly and said, "We just can't afford 2 full tuitions." My mother added that I should consider staying closer to home, perhaps a community college or a cheaper option. I could feel the words sting, but they seemed unaware, or maybe unwilling to notice, the disappointment I felt. Meanwhile, Erilyn's tuition had already been prepaid for all 4 years, her dorm room reserved, her classes registered. Every plan, every dollar, every attention was already set aside for her. I realized then that their choice was clear. They had already invested everything in Erilyn, and saw no room left for me. I could either beg for help and face rejection again, or I could find another way to make it work on my own. That day, as I folded my acceptance letter and tucked it into my bag, I decided that I would find a path forward without their help, even if it meant struggling alone. I didn't yet know how, but I knew I had to. I sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling slightly as I asked my father if he could co-sign a loan to help cover my tuition. I tried to keep my voice calm, careful not to sound desperate, but deep down I was nervous. He looked at me without saying a word at first, then shook his head slowly. "No, Brenna. We just can't do that," he said firmly. I felt my stomach drop. I turned to my mother, hoping for some kind of compromise, but she only suggested that I consider community college instead. Her words were soft, almost gentle, but they cut deeper than any harsh refusal could. I realized they didn't just lack the funds. They didn't believe in me the way they believed in Erilyn. I left the kitchen quietly, not wanting them to see my face, and walked to my room, heart heavy. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bed and listened. Through the slightly open door, I heard my parents talking in the living room. Their voices were low, filled with pride and hope, but every word was for Erilyn. "She's the one who will make this family proud," my mother said, and my father agreed. That simple sentence hit me harder than any rejection I had ever felt. It wasn't just about the money. It was about their belief, their pride, and their expectations. They had already chosen who mattered most to them, and it wasn't me. As I lay there in the dark, a quiet determination started to grow inside me. If they weren't going to support me, I would find another way. I would prove them wrong, not for their approval, but for myself. That night, the seed of my resolve was planted. I knew the path ahead would be hard, but I also knew I wasn't going to let their choice define me. I decided not to ask my parents for anything else. Instead of pleading or explaining, I deferred my admission for a year and focused on figuring out how to make it work on my own. I found 2 part-time jobs, one at a small bookstore and another at a local diner. The hours were long, and I often came home exhausted, but every dollar I earned brought me closer to my goal. I rented a tiny studio apartment that barely fit a bed and a desk. It wasn't fancy, and it certainly wasn't comfortable, but it was mine. I decorated it simply, with just the essentials, and slowly began building my own life. I set up a bank account, started paying bills on time, and worked to build credit so I could handle tuition and rent without relying on anyone. Every small accomplishment gave me a sense of independence I had never felt before. I also decided to cut off most contact with my parents. I stopped calling, texting, or sharing updates. They didn't know my apartment address or how hard I was working. From their perspective, it was easier to assume I had dropped out or decided not to attend school at all. I let them believe it. At first, the silence was lonely. I missed family dinners and even small conversations. But over time, I realized that this distance was necessary. Without their judgment and favoritism hanging over me, I could focus entirely on myself and my future. I learned to manage my time budget carefully and push through exhaustion without anyone cheering me on. By the end of that year, I had saved enough to cover tuition, books, and living expenses. I had created a quiet, steady foundation that my parents had never imagined I could build on my own. And in that silence, I discovered my own strength. The next year, I quietly reapplied to Havenport University through an honors transfer program. I spent weeks preparing my application, carefully highlighting every achievement I had earned while my parents assumed I was struggling. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not Erilyn, not even friends. Every essay, every recommendation, every form I submitted was done in complete secrecy. To cover the costs, I applied for private grants and scholarships. I spent hours researching programs that rewarded academic excellence and personal initiative. Slowly, the money started to come together. Each award I received felt like a small victory, proof that I could succeed without asking for help. I also sought out a competitive research fellowship in my field, one that would provide not just funding but recognition and experience that would set me apart. When I got accepted, I felt a quiet thrill. This was my moment, built entirely on my own effort. I refused to let anyone know how much I had accomplished. My parents still believed I was struggling, still thought I had chosen community college or worse, had dropped out entirely. That made every step of my progress feel like mine alone, untouched by favoritism or expectation. By the time I received my final acceptance letter, fully funded and recognized for my work, I felt a mix of relief and quiet pride. I had created my path without relying on anyone who had dismissed me. My parents didn't know the extent of my achievements, and that ignorance gave me power. I had proven, to myself first and foremost, that I could achieve more than anyone believed I could. I had finally taken control of my future, and it was entirely mine. While I was quietly building my life, Erilyn's world started to crumble. She struggled to keep up with her classes, missing assignments and falling behind on exams. Professors warned her about academic probation, and she barely made it through some semesters. Parties and social events took up most of her time, and she often complained about feeling too stressed to focus. On top of that, credit card bills piled up. My parents, believing she just needed support, kept sending money to cover everything: late fees, overdrafts, and unpaid tuition balances. They blamed her struggles on stress and overwork, never seeing that her poor choices were the real problem. They continued to lavish attention and financial help on her, thinking it would keep her afloat, while I quietly managed everything myself without their interference. I said nothing about what I knew or saw. I didn't warn my parents, didn't lecture Erilyn, and didn't involve myself in her chaos. I stayed focused on my own path, continuing to work multiple jobs, study late into the night, and save every penny I could. Each award I earned, each grant I received, felt even more meaningful compared to her dependence on my parents' money. As the months passed, it became clear that Erilyn's world was built on their constant support rather than her own effort. Every setback she faced only reminded me of the difference between relying on others and relying on yourself. I stayed patient, letting my progress grow quietly while hers faltered. I didn't rush to judgment, but I understood that the privileges my parents gave her would never teach her discipline or independence. Through it all, I kept climbing step by step, determined to reach a place where I couldn't be ignored or underestimated. My focus never wavered, and my resolve only strengthened as I watched her stumble. During my senior year, I opened my inbox to find an email from the dean's office. My hands shook slightly as I clicked it open, and I read the words slowly. I had been selected as valedictorian of the College of Biomedical Policy. I sat there for 10 minutes, staring at the screen, not because I couldn't believe it, but because I already knew what it meant for the people watching from the audience. I thought about my parents, Dorian and Lizette, sitting in the front row, expecting Erilyn to be the star. They had spent years building her up in their eyes, pouring money and attention into her future, convinced she would be the one to make them proud. Now their assumptions were about to be shattered, and I could picture their faces when the dean called my name instead. I didn't feel the need to celebrate out loud. I let the weight of the moment sink in quietly. All those years of working multiple jobs, living alone, saving every penny, and applying for scholarships had led to this. Every small choice I had made to stay disciplined and independent had brought me here. And now it was going to be recognized in front of everyone, including the parents who had never believed in me. The email felt like more than just an announcement. It was a symbol of all the effort I had poured into my own life, separate from their favoritism and doubt. I smiled faintly to myself, imagining the surprise on their faces, and the sense of quiet satisfaction that came from knowing I had achieved this entirely on my own. For the first time in years, I felt the power of being in control of my own story, and I knew that graduation day would be the moment everything changed. I decided to make sure my parents would be at the ceremony without knowing it was for me. I went through the university registrar's office and had 2 graduation tickets mailed to them anonymously. There was no note, no message, nothing to hint at the truth, just their names printed formally on the tickets. I pictured them opening the envelope and assuming the tickets were for Erilyn. They would probably smile, excited to see her walk across the stage, completely unaware that the star of the day would be someone else entirely. That thought gave me a quiet thrill. For years, they had expected me to fade into the background. Now I was turning that expectation into surprise. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I wanted the moment to be perfect, untouched by explanations or leaks. The secrecy added weight to the plan. It wasn't about being mean, but about letting the truth speak for itself. I had spent years proving I could succeed without their support, and this was the final step in showing them that their favoritism had blinded them. As I mailed the envelope, I imagined their excitement, their pride, and the anticipation they would feel, completely directed at Erilyn. I smiled quietly, knowing that when the day came, everything would shift in a way they never expected. The tickets felt like more than paper. They were a key, a signal that the moment of recognition had arrived. For years, I had prepared, struggled, and built my own path. Now all that effort would culminate in a single day, one that would leave no doubt about who had truly earned the spotlight. I just had to wait and watch. The day of graduation arrived, and the auditorium was filled with families, students, and faculty. The air was buzzing with excitement, everyone cheering and clapping for the graduates as their names were called. My parents sat in the front row, beaming, waiting for Erilyn to appear. I could see the anticipation in their eyes, completely unaware of what was about to happen. One by one, students were called up to receive their diplomas. I noticed Erilyn's name was never announced. I could see the confusion on my parents' faces as the list continued, and she still hadn't been called. They shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances, whispering to each other. It was clear that something had gone wrong, but they had no idea what it was. Finally, the dean stepped up to the podium to begin the valedictorian speech. The room quieted instantly, every eye turning toward the front. The dean smiled, shuffled some papers, and looked around the room, preparing to announce the top student. The tension in the auditorium was noticeable, and I stayed calm in the wings, watching carefully, letting the moment build. I could see my parents' expressions changing from concern to curiosity as they tried to figure out what was happening. They still assumed the focus was on Erilyn, expecting her to be recognized, but something in the air made them uneasy. Every second of waiting added to the suspense, and I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the moment they had expected for their favorite child was about to belong to me instead. As the dean opened his mouth to speak, the room held its breath. Everything I had worked for, all the struggles and sacrifices, had led to this single moment, and it was finally here. The dean cleared his throat and then said words I had dreamed of for years. And this year's valedictorian, graduating summa cum laude, Brenna Caldwell. My name didn't just reach the audience. It filled the entire hall, bouncing off the walls, impossible to ignore. I could feel the weight of it, the recognition of every late night, every paycheck I earned, every struggle I had endured on my own. I glanced at the crowd for just a moment, and saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth. Her eyes were wide, filled with shock and disbelief. My father had halfway stood up, frozen, his expression a mix of confusion and realization. They had expected Erilyn to walk across that stage, to be the center of attention, and instead, I had taken that place. I walked across the stage steadily, my posture calm and confident. I didn't look at them, didn't give them a chance to interrupt the moment. Every step felt like the culmination of years of effort and quiet determination. I accepted the diploma with a small, controlled smile, acknowledging the applause from the audience, while my parents sat frozen in their seats, struggling to process what had just happened. I could hear whispers ripple through the crowd, people noticing the tension, sensing the story behind the moment. I didn't need to say anything. My presence, my achievement, and the sheer surprise on my parents' faces said more than words ever could. For the first time in my life, I felt completely seen and recognized for my own merit, independent of their expectations or favoritism. The name they had ignored for years now echoed through the hall, undeniable, powerful, and unforgettable. In that moment, I understood that I had finally claimed my place, and it was impossible for them to take it away. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. I began by talking about the importance of resilience, about the challenges students face when they must find their own way. I shared stories of late nights studying, working multiple jobs, and learning to manage every responsibility on my own. I spoke about the quiet determination it takes to keep going when no one is cheering you on or offering help. I talked about students who finance their own futures, who push through obstacles without relying on family support, scholarships, or connections. I emphasized that success is not only measured by awards or recognition, but by the strength and persistence it takes to achieve goals independently. The audience listened quietly, many nodding, some taking notes, and I could feel the energy in the room shift with every word. I also spoke about children who are underestimated, who are overlooked in favor of those who seem more promising, more outgoing, or more visible. I didn't mention my parents or Erilyn by name. I didn't need to. Every person in the audience could feel the power in the story, the struggle behind every achievement, and the quiet satisfaction of proving oneself against all odds. By the time I finished, the room erupted in applause. I looked out at the faces around me, proud classmates, professors, and families. I could see my parents' expressions, a mixture of shock, guilt, and awe, and it made every sacrifice, every struggle, every lonely night worth it. I stepped down from the podium knowing that the message had landed exactly where it needed to. I had spoken my truth, and without saying a word about anyone specifically, I had made them understand that success earned quietly is often the most powerful. After the ceremony ended, my parents hurried toward me, tears in their eyes, voices trembling as they apologized over and over. "We always believed in you," my mother said, her words rushing out in a mix of guilt and relief. My father reached for my hand, trying to embrace me, but I held up a small paper I had printed earlier. A copy of the student loan repayment receipt, stamped clearly, paid in full. I looked at them steadily and said, I learned to stop waiting for support that was never coming. My voice was calm, even, but every word carried the weight of years of struggle, of late nights, of working hard without recognition. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I simply let the evidence speak for itself. Erilyn stood a few feet away, silent, her face unreadable. For years, she had been the favorite, the one they believed in, the one they thought would carry the family name proudly. Now she watched, powerless, as the truth of effort and resilience played out before her. My parents stared at the receipt, the realization slowly sinking in. All the money, all the attention they had poured into Erilyn, none of it had built the person who truly succeeded. It had built someone who struggled without learning self-reliance. They had invested in the wrong daughter, and karma had quietly delivered its lesson. I didn't need to explain further. The moment itself carried the message. Favoritism can inflate egos, but struggle builds real strength. Every step I had taken on my own, every hardship I had endured without help, had brought me here. And in that parking lot, with the applause of the ceremony still echoing in the distance, I knew I had claimed not just my diploma, but my power, my independence, and my rightful recognition.
Some stories don't end, they follow you. If this one stayed in your mind, you know what to do.